So some people have been asking me to do an explainer of how Israel's treatment of Palestine over the last 75 years constitutes an apartheid. I took all of this information from Human Rights Watch and from a February 2022 Amnesty International report entitled Israel's Apartheid Against Palestinians, a Cruel System of Domination and a Crime Against Humanity. So I'll go over kind of the steps of what constitutes an apartheid and examples, not even the full story, but examples of how Israel is perpetrating every single one of those against Palestine. And to be clear, this is prior to the ongoing genocide, because we have now moved from apartheid to genocide, and there are plenty of explainers out there talking about how Israel's carpet bombing of Gaza and forced removal of citizens constitutes a genocide. Okay, so step one of an apartheid is treating a certain group, like an outgroup, as a demographic threat. And Israel has been treating Palestine and Palestinians as a demographic threat. One of the goals of Israel is to establish and maintain a Jewish demographic majority, which means not allowing Palestinians to vote. And there have been attempts to Judaize areas of Israel and the West Bank via threats, intimidation, violence, and forcible transfer. This violence has extended to non-Ashkenazi Jews as well, with the Israeli Health Ministry admitting in 2013 to the involuntary sterilization of Ethiopian Jewish women and immigrants. There's a great essay in the Yale Review of International Studies called Be Fruitful and Multiply, the role of Israeli pro-natalist policy in the pursuit of Jewish demographic dominance in the Holy Land. And this essay clarifies Israel's policies in enhancing Ashkenazi reproduction specifically, and diminishing procreational support for Sephardic and Mizrahi Jews, as well as the Arab population and Palestinians. So part of the Israeli apartheid project has been controlling reproduction and treating Palestinians as a demographic threat. Second, Israel has perpetrated massive seizure of Palestinian land and property. And I'm not just talking about the 1948 Nakba and ongoing Nakba. 10% of the West Bank land and 38% of Palestinian land in East Jerusalem has been expropriated from 1967 just to 2017. As in the Negev, Palestinians in East Jerusalem and Area C of the occupied Palestinian territories live under full Israeli control. This means that authorities deny building permits to Palestinians in these areas, forcing them to build illegal structures which are demolished again and again and again. So they build a home, the structure is demolished because they don't have a permit, they have to do the same thing over again in order to remain housed. Palestinians are effectively blocked from leasing on 80% of Israel's state land as a result of racist land seizures and a web of discriminatory laws on land allocation, planning, and zoning. So that's another way that Israel has been perpetrating an apartheid, is the seizure of Palestinian land and property. Another way that we can label apartheid is via unlawful killings and torture by a state group against this sort of outgroup. And if I were to talk about all of the different times that the Israeli occupation force has killed and tortured Palestinians, we would be here forever. So I'll give just an example. In 2018, Palestinians held weekly protests along the border calling for the right of return to Israel/Palestine. Prior to the protests even beginning, senior Israeli officials warned that any Palestinian approaching the wall would be shot. And by the end of 2019, Israeli occupation forces had killed 220 civilians, including 46 children. These were peaceful protests. Another recognizable sign of apartheid are these in-group only spaces. So segregation of Palestinians from Jewish Israelis and maintenance of Jews only spaces. There are reserved Jewish roads in Israel. There are Jews-only urban development properties, Jews-only parks and recreational spaces, Jews-only businesses. There are places where Palestinians are not allowed to move that are reserved for the Jewish population only. And if that's not a sign of an apartheid government, I'm really not sure what is. Think about South Africa. Think about segregation in the United States. We should be able to recognize these flags. Alongside these Jews-only spaces are drastic movement restrictions placed upon Palestinians. Since the mid-1990s, Israeli authorities have imposed increasingly stringent movement restrictions on Palestinians in the occupied Palestinian territories. A web of military checkpoints, roadblocks, fences, and other structures control the movement of Palestinians within the occupied territories and restricts their travel both to Israel and abroad. They are fenced in by a literal 700-kilometer fence, which isolates Palestinians inside what are called military zones. We might think of these as ghettos or concentration camps. Palestinians are forced to obtain multiple special permits anytime they either enter or leave their homes. In Gaza, more than 2 million Palestinians have lived under Israeli blockade, and according to Amnesty International, are segregated not only from Israel, but from the rest of the world. There's no way for them to access any other country except by moving through Israel, and they need permission to do so. These folks have never experienced a day of freedom in their lives. Their every move is subject to the Israeli military's approval, and this is a constant reminder of their political powerlessness. Another clear indicator of apartheid is denial of nationality and citizenship. Palestinian citizens of Israel are denied a nationality, establishing a legal differentiation from Jewish Israelis. In the West Bank and Gaza, Israel has controlled the population registry since 1967. Palestinians have no citizenship. They're considered stateless, and they're required to carry ID cards issued from the Israeli military to live and work in these territories. When have we heard of ID cards being weaponized against a population before? Palestinians in annexed East Jerusalem are granted permanent residence instead of citizenship. However, this status is permanent in name only. Since 1967, more than 14,000 Palestinians have had their residencies revoked at the discretion of the Ministry of the Interior, which has resulted in their forcible transfer outside of the city. So each of these steps, treating Palestinians as a demographic threat, massive seizure of Palestinian land and property, unlawful killings and torture, forcible transfer of people and segregation of Palestinians from Jewish Israelis, drastic movement restrictions, and denial of nationality and citizenship constitute a crime against humanity as defined in the Rome Statute and the Apartheid Convention. This meets the legal definition, the international legal definition of an apartheid. And again, all of this was going on prior to the now ongoing genocide in Gaza. Free Gaza, free the West Bank, free Palestine.